Welcome to Rehash, a Web3 podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Rehash. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and in this episode, we will be talking about the Web3 creator economy, community building in DAOs, and a lot more with Jonathan Mann, creator of SongADAO, amongst other things. Welcome, Jonathan. It's always great to chat with you.
Thank you. Happy to be with you again, although different podcasts, different circumstances.
Yes.
But again, nonetheless.
It's crazy to think that the last time I had you on my podcast was 2 podcasts ago. It was only about 9 months ago. SongADAO was not a thing at all. Like, this is actually my first time talking to you about SongADAO. Like, I've been in the Discord since day one, but I've never had a chance to just like ask you questions about it until now.
If it was 9 months ago, I think it's conceivable that SongADAO, as it exists, wasn't even a concept yet, which is wild actually to think.
It wasn't. I think I remember you saying that you had an idea to turn this song thing into a DAO. And like funny. That's about as far as we got with that. So now great. It's a full thing. But before we get into that, for anybody who doesn't know who you are, can you just give a little background into, who you are, what you've been doing, what you're known for, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So my name is Jonathan Mann, and I write a song a day, and it's been 13 years and 109 days, or 4,857 days of writing a song every single day. I started on January 1st of 2009, which is a long time ago. And I feel constantly reminded these days of how long I've been doing this and how old it makes me feel sometimes.
I love that you have all of it captured on video. That's my favorite part, is going back to the old videos and watching those.
Yeah, I look quite different, right? I think it's funny because I really think that, like, if I keep doing this, a future song a day watcher / listener will be able to see a very distinct, like, moment, which is like the pandemic, actually, where the way I looked for pre-pandemic and post-pandemic is like a very distinct marking point, where like I had hair and I didn't have a beard, all through, and then like at the pandemic hit, and I go from being like the other thing is, like, I used to do a lot of performing at conferences, and people would always assume that I was a lot younger than I was, even when I was like 32, 33, 34, up into my mid 30s. People assumed I was like in my late 20s. People would always be like, "Oh, you're so young." I'm like, I'm not that young. And now no one makes that mistake anymore. I was like, the pandemic like aged me right up into like, no, now he's a 4-year-old Jewish man now. Like,
no, now you just look distinguished.
Yes, exactly. Now I look my age, which I enjoy. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've been making music since 2009, a song every day. How has that transition been, going from a purely Web 2 world, like being a content creator, being a musician in a purely Web 2 world before, Bitcoin was even conceived of, until now, where you've got SongADAO, like you operate in a pretty Web 3 world. You're still very much doing the same thing you're doing, writing a new song every day, but in such a different context. Like, what has that journey been like?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, so Bitcoin actually, the first block of Bitcoin was mined, I think, if I'm not mistaken, January 3rd of 2009. And I started January 1st of 2009. So it was like literally we basically started at the same time, me and Bitcoin, which is really wild.
You're 2 days older than Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Song a day is 2 years older. Exactly. Yeah, it's sort of funny to think about, because I see there's actually quite a few song a day projects now that exist within the NFT space. If you just go on OpenSea, you can find like any number of people. And it's interesting for me to think about, like, if I was starting now, I do think to a certain extent it would make perfect sense to like start it on OpenSea or on Foundation or in some kind of NFT kind of way. It's a collectible. It makes perfect sense, which is always what I thought about Song a Day, that it would be a good fit. But to answer your question, like, the technology is like always changed, and SongADAO started on YouTube. Actually, SongADAO started on Tumblr for the first couple days that didn't have a video, and it was just audio of me posting on Tumblr. And that gives you a sense of like what was, it was Tumblr was relatively new, and it was very exciting because it was like so easy to set up a Tumblr, and it was great. Like the interface was great, everything about it was really nice. And then shortly thereafter, I got on YouTube, and I already kind of had a little bit of an audience there. But it's very clear to me that like if I were to start now, I'd probably be like on TikTok, I probably would have started on TikTok and maybe posted those as NFTs or something. But yeah, so I've just always been really interested in like different ways that different technologies, especially on the web, essentially could be folded into SongADAO. And I've always tried to like look out for anything and anything that would like, as I've gone along. Back in those days, there was a big question. There was still kind of a big question of like, should you post to like other video platforms? Should it just be YouTube, or should you also post to like Dailymotion and Vimeo and Veo and like all these different ones? So I was always like looking on that end. And then it was like 2017 when I first got, I don't know if we talked about this last time, but when I first got really interested in crypto, and I saw sort of immediately how NFTs, before they were called that, NFTs, CryptoPunks specifically is what I saw first, could be applied to my project as a way of, making money off of it in a new and interesting way. And all of that has sort of led to like everything that I've done since then.
Yeah, one thing I find, I mean, so many things I find fascinating about what you've been doing since 2009, but one thing is, how did you, I guess, like make money in the Web 2 world, doing this? Because I tried my hand at travel blogging for a few years and got to a certain point, but it just wasn't enough to like live in a big city and, want to live my life
Totally.
the way I was living it.
Yeah. So a couple different ways. Like I was like freelancing, right? I was doing a lot of like random odd gigs, doing like video work for people, for like local businesses, writing songs for various things. It's hard to be like a songwriter, especially the kind of songwriter I am. Like there's no place for like jingles or like little catchy songs about things. For that's not like a thing that people need or feel like they need. I always thought that like I would have done a lot better in like the 80s or like the 60s when jingles on TV were a thing, because that's a skill that I have, like that's like one of my nascent marketable skills. So there was that. And then in that first year of SongADAO specifically, I actually made quite a living like entering video contests where like there's a site on the internet called onlinevideocontest.com, which still exists, and it just collects every single video contest that exists. And I would just go and I would just enter a ton of them, making them SongADAO songs. So sort of killing two birds. I would like make this video in a day and post it, and then I would like win a couple a month, and like that could be my income. And then and then also, to be honest, like my parents would help if things were really really rough for like 1 month. Like they would help cover what was left of the rent or something. So that I was really lucky to have that room, but they were also always like right on the verge of being like, okay, Jonathan, like you need to find something else to do, because like this is not cutting it. Anytime they would like really put their foot down and be like, okay, we're never going to give you any more money, something would happen where like I would get on TV or something, or like I would win like a $10,000 video contest, or like something would keep it going. I'd be like just barely be able to keep it going, for years, maybe from like 2011 until just before the pandemic. I did a lot of conference work. I would go to a conference and then watch the talks and then write a song that recapped the conference. And I would say probably like I was when it got up to like the most that I ever did, it was probably like one or two of those a month for maybe like 3 or 4 years or something like that. And those paid really well because it was like associations and corporate gigs and that kind of stuff. And so that was able to like sustain me even while, SongADAO itself just sort of chugged along and didn't, in and of itself, didn't really bring in any money. There's like a little bit, maybe like $100 to $500 of YouTube ad revenue, maybe like $700 from Patreon, like not a living, but the living sort of came from these corporate gigs that I could take, and then I could keep SongADAO going sort of in the background, always looking for like something that would allow me. The dream would be to be able to just do SongADAO and not have to do anything else.
I think that's a very relatable experience for anybody who's tried their hand at being a creator of any kind, a writer, musician, artist, any of that. So then NFTs enter the picture in 2017. You discover CryptoPunks. You start to think about how this could apply to SongADAO. And then what? Like, did it just change for you overnight, or what was the journey from that point on?
I mean, even that was like a really, really, really long journey because, it was so new and so undeveloped at that point. It really felt like back in those days that like, that I pretty much knew every single person who was interested in NFTs. Like literally I knew them because it was probably like 40 people total, And that number was like growing, but slowly enough that like anybody knew who was interested in it. We would have been like, oh, here's a new person who gets NFTs and was like excited about it. So it was so new. There wasn't like, back then there was a lot of platforms. There's a lot of like potential platforms. Super Rare founded back then. I mean, Super Rare really was the only one for a while, but I guess Known Origin was around. But like, the dream was to have my own contract from which I minted a song every day and sold it. Either sold it for like a set price or an auction. I didn't really know. But Solidity devs were like hard to find, and the ones that I could find were really expensive. And I needed like Solidity devs, I needed like web dev stuff, and like so I tried a bunch of different things. I did something called the initial song offering, like right in the thick of ICO mania. Actually, not in the thick of it. I'd say like once ICO mania had maybe peaked, I launched something called the initial song offering, which is essentially just a like a Kickstarter that I made for the project. And there was rewards and stuff and all that kind of thing. Now, right now, if I was launching it, if Mirror had existed back then, I would have used that. That's exactly what I was looking for and needing. And that didn't work. Like I got one person to do it. And then, I did a song at DevCon and I sold that. That was like one of the first tokenized songs on Ethereum in 2018. And that sold for 2.5 ETH, which was like $500 at the time. So there was like a whole variety of things that I was trying, but I will say like, maybe by like mid to late 2019, it just felt like it. I don't really have a memory of exactly what happened. I feel like the last like big hurrah that I did was in May of 2019. There was the Rare AF Fest that happened. The second one was like Rare AF 2 that happened in Brooklyn. And I feel like after that, my energy that I felt like I could devote to trying to make NFTs happen, trying to make the SongADAO NFT project happen, really dwindled. And I really had this sense of like, I don't even know if NFTs are going to be a thing. Like, I hope they are. And I think in the long term, they probably will be. But I was like, with everything else that I'm doing with the conferences and like my kids, I like don't have enough energy to devote to this. And so then fast forward, like we have the whole pandemic happens. The whole first part of lockdown rather happens. And then it was like late 2020 when I saw Beeple had sold all of his things as NFTs. And my heart like dropped to my feet. I felt so jealous and angry about it. I was like, Beeple! I was like, the other thing a day guy is selling his things as NFTs. Oh no. Like, I was so mad. And then once I got over being mad, I was like, oh, okay, but this is an opportunity. This, like, he has a massive following, way bigger than anything I've ever had. And so, like, that means that maybe people are interested. Maybe people will be interested in NFTs. So, Matt Condon and I, who we both know, like, spun our podcast back up. I was like, Matt, I was like, I can probably find the text where I was like, Matt, I think NFTs are happening. I think it's gonna be a thing. He's like, great, cool. Let's do the podcast again. And so from that point forward, from basically, like, I want to say November, December of 2020, all the way through the end of 2021, I was just building. I was building this thing, and finally the tools, while I was gone, while I was, like, out of the space for like a year, the tools had come a long way. And so I was able to mint some stuff on OpenSea. I was able to raise some money that way. And I was able to find the Solidity devs, and, like, the infrastructure was there for me to, like, find these people and build the thing.
Yeah. So before we jump into SongADAO, which
Yeah.
spun up at the end of last year, early this year, I want to ask you something. I asked you this on the last podcast too, but I think this is just something that every listener is going to be wondering: is how do you keep up the momentum to keep up the energy, the momentum, the motivation to do something every day for 13 years? Like, I think I said last time, like, I don't think I can even say I brush my teeth every day for the last 13 years. There's, like, literally nothing, maybe, like, gotten dressed. I mean, maybe some days, like, not even gotten dressed. Like, I don't know that there's anything I've done every day for the last 13 years. How do you do that?
Yeah. It can be hard. It can be hard. A lot of days I sit down. I mean, like today, I, like, sit down, I'm, like, tired. I don't feel particularly inspired in any way. I'm, like, just grasping out for, like, any ideas. And I actually now have this, like, extra burden, I want to call it, of, like, and we'll get into this, but, like, the DAO relying on me, like, because I'm right now, like, the sole income for the DAO comes from my song. So I'm like, there's this extra thing of, like, oh, I at least want, because my standard response is basically, like, the way that I do it is by not having any expectations, by keeping my expectations about what the song is going to be very, 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 very low, and, like, allowing myself, like, on days where I need to just phone it in and just, like, make it completely suck, which is complicated now, because I don't feel as comfortable doing that as I used to because of the DAO. But that's the main answer. Or making anything for a day for that long is not for everybody. There are those of us who do it, and there's a number of people, who I know who, like, have these really long, people, like, who have these really long term. And I think it just is, like, a certain kind of person. It's not necessarily obsession. A lot of people assume that it's a kind of an OCD obsession thing. It's not that. It's more just like we can, and so we do, if that makes sense. But it's not like, I often think, like, when we look at the things that other people do that we can't do or we don't do, it can seem very mysterious. When I watch people make what they make with code, it just seems, I'm like, how do you do that? It's, like, so mysterious to me. And I've tried to learn to code, and I understand, like, the basics of it, I understand essentially how it works, but it just seems so outside of my realm of possibility. But honestly, it's just like, you just do it, right? You just learn, you just practice it, and then you just do it. And that's really, like, that's ultimately all that it is just, like, practice and just, like, sitting down every day and doing it.
Something else that you said to me before too is, I think I asked you, how do you, I think a lot of people, especially writers, I mean, that's just more of, like, the world that I come from, is with writers. And with writers, it's like you get writer's block. And a lot of the times people are like, oh, I've got to write this article on X, Y, and Z. And then it never gets done. Or, like, 6 months later, they finally spin up a first draft. And I think I asked you, how do you get over that hump of, like, I'm just not going to produce a banger of a song every day. And I think you said, I think what you said to me was that actually set aside a week or whatever time frame to create the worst possible
Yes.
sounding thing you
Yeah.
possibly can.
Yeah.
And that sort of just helps you get over that fear of having to make everything perfect, because you've experienced, I made this horrible sounding thing and I'm still here and it's okay.
Yeah. And it's really challenging to, like, when you set out to make something bad, right? You're just like, okay, I am gonna, like, my goal is gonna sit down and write the bad version of this article. Like, it's just gonna be horrible. Like, that's the point of me sitting here right now. I'm not gonna leave this chair until I've just banged out, like, the worst version that I can possibly think of. Because then what you do, and not only that, it's, like, always easier to start from something than it is to start from nothing. So not only have you, like, freed yourself to actually write something, which, by the way, is probably not going to be as bad as you tried to make it be, because actually, once you have enough practice and skill at something over time, even when you try to do something, often trying to do something good results in something worse, and trying to do something bad results in something better. If that makes sense. It's like the intention going into it can have a real effect on what comes out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's managing expectations too, because if you go in expecting to create something bad, then whatever you make is probably going to be better than what you expected, and
Exactly.
vice
Yeah.
versa.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
And
so
it
let's
goes with
yeah.
it goes with inspiration too, where or like putting emotion into something, or, like, I always think about, like, I'm going to write the most emotionally deep song right now. It's like, no, you're not. Good luck with that. But if you're just like, I'm just going to write something that's going to be blah, chances are something might come out of you, because you're not putting pressure on yourself to be this, like, amazing emotional person. You're just, like, freeing up you're, like, clearing the way for something to come out, whatever it is. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, for sure. So let's finally get into SongADAO. This last time we spoke on the podcast, at least, this was a mere thought in your head. Nothing had really been formulated yet. So how did SongADAO come about from, the very early days? When did you first get the idea? And then how did you go about building this out?
Yeah. So I'd be so fascinated. I should go back and listen back to what I said, of what I was thinking about at that time. The like the first time I heard about DAOs was, like, back in 2018. Obviously the DAO had happened, and I don't think I knew about the DAO back then. All I knew is that there was, like, some cool people that I'd met at ETH Denver who were, in Meta Cartel, and were, like, working on a bunch of different DAO kind of stuff. And I remember talking to them, and actually some Meta Cartel people who evolved into Raid Guild started to build some of what became SongADAO World and SongADAO, and then ended up actually being the people that built it much later on when I hired Raid Guild. But, like, they were, like, the first people that I talked to about it. And I remember, like, I remember talking to them about DAOs, and them being, oh, you should totally make SongADAO into a DAO. And I was like, okay, what would that look like? And I was like, oh, like, people would, like, people would, like, vote on what you should write about. And, it was just kind of this very amorphous kind of thing. And it didn't really interest me that much. And then, like, the real turning point for me with DAOs was a project called The Song That Owns Itself, called STOI, STOI.org, which is still one of my absolute favorite projects, and I love everyone involved in it. I think they're just so brilliant. And they had this thing where the like legal IP rights, the copyright for a song was owned by a DAO legally, because the DAO had, like, a LLC wrapper around it, and any royalties that the song generated would flow back into the DAO and could flow back into the DAO members. And what really appealed to me about that was that there's this huge overlap of what people expect when it comes to NFTs. Like even now, people think that on some basic level that an NFT must confer some rights to go with it, to the art that it's attached to, which is like not the case, obviously, at all. You know, an NFT has nothing to do. People hear contract, right? They hear smart contract and they think contract, royal rights, you know. But as we've seen in the NFT space, like there's a wide variety of different ways that people are exploring this, of like what rights are conferred with an NFT, and that's made a huge impact. But like even back in 2017, when I was getting really excited about NFTs for the first time, before they were even called NFTs, and I would explain, let's say, to like a boomer about like what NFTs were, and like I had to go through the whole explanation of like what it was and how it worked. And then I explained my project, and their first question would always be, oh, so does it mean that they get the rights to the song when they buy the NFT? That would be like their first question. But their first sort of follow-up question would always be about rights. And so it's always been something that I've thought about a lot, of like, well, people expect this. People really think that there's something to do with NFTs and rights, and there's not. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be. If that's what people are expecting, that's what people think of, it's an interesting question. Rights is a very amorphous idea. There's lots of different ways to attack and to think about rights, especially in music, because there's like the royalty rights, which is very specific. It's about like who owns the copyright. And that's, don't even get me started on that. That's extremely complicated, because there's the publishing rights, and there's the writer's share of the rights, and there's mechanical, and there's sync licensing, and there's like all these different, and there's the radio, and there's like internet radio, and there's Pandora, and then that's different, and this is different. And so that's like copyright royalty stuff. But then there's like the rights to perform the song, the rights to cover the song, the rights to remix it or reuse it in some way, which is distinct from the royalties. So it's just like very complicated. So what I loved about Stowie and the song that owns itself is it sidestepped everything of like a specific person owning an NFT conferring to them rights. Instead, it conferred those rights to the DAO, and anyone in the DAO could benefit from the rights in that way. And I love that idea. I love that basic idea that like we weren't doing a sort of one-to-one rights transfer where it's like you buy my song and then you get the rights. It's like you buy my song, you join the DAO, and now as part of the DAO, you can vote and you have certain you can help control the rights of the song rather than like just a one-to-one individual thing. And that to me was super exciting, of like, because then my mind got thinking, is like, then it's like, oh, suddenly a DAO becomes like a label almost. It becomes like this whole other support system where everybody in the DAO, their incentive, it's about alignment and incentive that we always talk about in DAOs, where, we want the song to be heard by more people so that the DAO gets more money so that we can do more cool things. And the other one that really struck me was NOUNSS, which launched now like almost a year ago. And when that happened, it was like, oh wow, okay, so one noun every day forever. It's like, first of all, I feel like they sort of stole my, again, I'm like, NOUNSS is like stole my thunder here, because I make a song a day. Like that's my whole thing. Like stop encroaching on my thing a day stuff, people. But I loved it, and I still love it. I love everything about it. I think it's insane what they sell for. I think it's amazing. But this idea of NFT as membership, and then suddenly those two things combined in my brain, and it was just like, yeah, that's it. That's what I want to do, and it became very clear.
Yeah. So what are some things that people can vote on in SongADAO?
Yeah. So we've had 2 votes so far. And I do want to note something I'm very proud of, is that we work on a one person, one vote basis, whereas almost every DAO, including NOUNSS, operates on a how many tokens do you hold. So, if you hold 5 nouns, you get 5 votes. if you hold 5 songs in SongADAO, you still get 1 vote. If you own 1 song, you get 1 vote. If you own 100 songs, you get 1 vote, which just feels much more democratic to me and feels much more sort of like less, because if you can buy more things, the idea is that if you have more things, your incentives are more in line, but I don't think that outweighs the cost of only rich people having the ability to influence the vote in a big way. So we have a system where we connect people to Bright ID, and then with Bright ID through Snapshot, they do 1 person, 1 vote. And we've had 2 votes so far. The first vote was to fund and seed the NFTX vault for SongADAO, for SongADAO rather. I'm not sure if you're familiar with NFTX. I always do a really bad job explaining it, but it's basically like a liquidity pool for NFTs. So there's like a pool for apes, and there's a pool for CryptoPunks, and there's a pool for every NFT. And every big NFT has an NFTX pool, and you can put your NFT in there, and you can earn yield on your NFT just sitting in there. And then, if I want to buy an NFT, I can always go to the NFTX vault and just pay the floor price, whatever that is at the time, and always just get a song, always get an NFT out. And so we funded to the tune of about 13 ETH. We bought up the floor of SongADAO, put it all in this NFTX vault, and that was a really cool thing that we did. And then the second thing that we had a vote on just a couple weeks ago is we have this really cool PFP project that we're doing that is only for full SongADAO members, and the PFPs are going to be non-transferable. They're going to be sort of soul bound, as the nomenclature goes. And we voted to hire an artist, this guy Dave Homer, to do the layers for the PFPs. So those have been the first 2 votes. We have another vote coming up, I think, pretty soon, where we're working on a token curated registry project, which is a whole other can of worms. But these are the kind of things, mostly the things that we're voting on right now are like, have to do with like, projects that the DAO is working on and funding, and funding those basically.
Token curated registry. What is that? How does that work?
Okay. I'm again, like some of these things I'm like, I'm at the point where, I basically understand them, but I probably don't understand them because I can't do the best job explaining to them. But a token curated registry is an idea that popped up back in the day, back in, I want to say 2018. I want to say Simon de la Riviere invented it. He either invented it or popularized it, as he did so many things back then. But the basic idea is it's sort of an attempt to solve curation, the problem of curation, through sort of tokenomics. And so the way it works is like you have the classic example that everyone would say is like Yelp or something. Like imagine like a review site. And so what Yelp tries to do, right, is it tries to curate like the good restaurants from the bad restaurants, right? It lets people rate things, and it's a curation system for figuring out what are the best hotels, what are the best restaurants here in Hartford where I live, or whatever, right? And so what a token curated registry does is it has a token associated with it. So instead of just like, I ate out at Applebee's or whatever, and I had a horrible experience, so I'm going to give it a 1 star. You would need to own some of the token of this registry, and you would need to stake the token. And it works in various ways in various things, but the essential idea is that like you stake your token to your choice. I want to give Applebee's 1 star. And in various incarnations of that, there's a thing where like if too many people disagree with you, you might lose that token. So you have to like think very carefully, and be very like judicious and honest, and you can't just go willy-nilly like staking your token one way or the other. You have to really think about it. In other conceptions, there's ways where if you were right and early, if you find like a hole in the wall restaurant that like you think is amazing. Oh my God, these fish tacos at this like little place is so good. And you're like, I'm going to stake so much token there to say like, this is the best place. And then it turns out you're right. And like other people are staking tokens. There's a mechanism whereby you can earn tokens for being correct on your, correct and early on your, so that essentially, people listening to this who like actually could explain it are probably going to be really mad at me, but like that essentially is like the bare bones of like how I understand it. Yeah.
I love the part where you get rewarded for being an early adopter, because
Yeah.
like how easy is it to ape into things that you already know are legit, or even to like back people in web3 that you know on crypto Twitter who already have 100K followers. Like how easy, anybody can do that. But to be like someone's first fan,
Yes.
or like a restaurant's first fan, or
Yeah.
anything's first fan, that is like, I think that's so much more special, and
Totally.
you should be rewarded a lot more for being someone's first fan than for being somebody's like 10,000th fan.
And we have that, right, to some degree with NFTs, right? That's the NFTs attempt to solve this problem from one angle, which is if you believe in an artist and you think that they're great, and you buy, if you bought an X copy back in 2018 for 0.01 ETH, and you're like, you like Jason Bailey did. Jason Bailey, my friend who does who does a lot of blogging around this and has been hugely influential in the NFT space. Like he's a big reason I think that like a lot of the early NFT artists are who they are, because he staked a claim. He was like, you guys need to pay attention to X copy. His work is amazing, but what a token curated registry could do, is sort of just like spread it out over many, many, many more artists. It's like, rather than having to like find the artist and collect them, you can imagine a site where the whole point is that you're looking through and you're finding different artists, and you have a certain amount of a token to sort of like, okay, I'm gonna stake some on this person and some on that person. It's sort of like NFTs do it to a certain extent. The way I think about it is like NFTs are sort of like a long-term token curated registry almost, where you are staking your token, you're staking your ETH in exchange for NFT, where in a long enough time horizon, it can become clear that X copy is the holy grail of NFTs. Whereas with the token curated registry, where the site specifically is aimed at uncovering new, upcoming, interesting, good artists, could like make that happen much faster, because we're all there and we're all doing it for this explicit purpose of like uncovering hidden gems and like good things. So that's sort of how I think about the difference between like the benefits of that.
I love that. Something else I want to talk to you about is community building, because with starting any DAO, community building is obviously a big part of that. And you have SongADAO, but you've built other communities in the past too. I mean, you have your podcast listeners for Digitally Rare. You have the fucking trolls, which is quite the spicy community. Like when you think about building a new community, whether it's SongADAO or one of your other projects, where does your thinking start with? And like, how do you start that process? Because like for me, I always go to values. I think like if you just put out the values that you hold and that you want the community to hold, like yeet that out into the metaverse,
right,
then the right people will come to you.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how I think about it. But I'm curious to hear like what's your thought process when it comes to community building?
I mean, I'll be honest, like I look at some of the NFT communities out there and I feel as though I don't know anything about this, to be honest. Like, I look at like what Justin Aversano has done with like Twin Flames and his whole thing, or or even like something like the Bored Apes, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but like certainly they were able to create something. And I do often feel like in this space, too often what we call community, if you actually like spend enough time in the spaces where the so-called communities happening. So much of it is like floor price talk, and the community is based around prices and like, and that kind of stuff. And so I've often wondered if this whole thing about community in NFTs, would it last through a bear market of the kind that we saw in 2018, 2019, 2020? Like, if the prices weren't there and things weren't selling for insane amounts of money and you couldn't, would these communities still exist? And so my whole approach with SongADAO has just been like to tie it to, the dailiness of Song a Day, and the sort of like the just like day by day churn of like, that's what I have to offer. We don't talk about, prices or anything like that. Like, that's not ever anything that comes up. I know, like, for instance, like Crypto Coven, they have like a phrase like lore not floor, which I really appreciate and I like a lot. I will say one like really simple thing that I feel like has been really great for SongADAO that I learned from Matthew Shame of Songcamp, who I think actually maybe more than anybody else is like a community guru somehow with what he's done with Songcamp. And I actually think a huge part of this is this thing, which is just like his weekly calls, his weekly, what he calls heartbeat calls. And I just call them the weekly hangouts. But like, because of him, I started doing those like every Wednesday mid morning. We have just like a weekly call, and it's anything from like, 10 to 25 people from the DAO, just, the sort of core group of people just coming and like, talking, and I'm just like updating folks on like what's happening, and like we're just chatting and stuff. And that to me is like, I couldn't recommend that enough to anyone who is starting a community or doing it, just whoever shows up, just to do that every week. And it's hard to, with everything else we have going on in our lives, to like make space for something like that. In fact, I even remember having a conversation with Matthew at NFT NYC, where I was talking to him about it. And I was like, I don't know how you do it, man, every week. It's sort of like what you were saying to me about SongADAO. It's like every week you're there with your thing. It's like, how do you do that? You just do. And now that I'm doing it, it's like, I think it's really important. I think it's a really important sort of benchmark, just or like base layer rather, bedrock is maybe the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying earlier about what you have to offer being just that you show up every day, you're there every day. I think that's huge. I think like especially in the space with people sort of riding these hype waves, it's like so many people launch projects and there's so much hype around it, and then a month later it's completely dead because the hype dies out, and then the whoever created the project is no longer invested in it, no longer interested or passionate about it. So that, I think, the fact that you have proven to everyone, like you're not just saying this, like you've
Yeah.
very much proven that you can show up every day and that you will show up every day and do the work. That alone is like enough for me to ape into like anything that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that is really what I have to offer, and I have a huge question about all the different NFT projects that exist today and whether or not they will exist in 5 years. Like what is the NFT, especially sort of the PFP kind of craze that we're in still somehow. One would have thought, I think, that it would have died down by now. And it has. But then you see something like Moonbirds and you're like, really? Wow, like it's just still going. And I really wonder like what will exist. What of these NFTs will exist in 5 years? 5 years is a long time. A lot changes.
Give us your best prediction then. What do you think will exist? If gun to your head, you had to pick, what's going to exist in 5 years.
There's a big part of me, I'm torn on this. Like, there's a big part of me that sort of would be surprised if kind of any of them existed almost. If we go through like a real deal bear market, I'm not sure that something like Bored Apes even can survive that.
What about CryptoPunks? CryptoPunks has already survived 5 years.
CryptoPunks already did, but the problem with the reason they did is because the community that grew up around CryptoPunks was not at its heart based around these prices and things. It was just enthusiasts who really loved the project. And every other project has grown out of this hype cycle that had such huge amounts of money pouring into it. And at some point, that has to stop. And it seems like it's already gone through some ebbs and flows. But when I say stop, I mean, I'm imagining like what we went through last time. It's like ETH going from whatever it was, $1,700 to like $80 within whatever, like a couple months, like that kind of a blow. Could they survive that? Just from like even a financial standpoint, like the people that, if your Bored Ape suddenly goes from being worth, $200,000 to being worth $10,000, let's say, what does that do for you, for your feeling about Bored Apes? You know what I mean? How much of your feeling about Bored Apes is tied up in its price? When I bought my CryptoPunk, it was $87. I didn't buy it thinking that it was going to be like my ticket to, financial freedom. I bought it because I fucking loved it, And I'm sure there are people that bought apes back in the day because they just loved them. And so, maybe it survives in that way. And if, I don't know, who knows, if we never, it seems unlikely to me that we never have like a true bear market again. Like that's impossible. Like cycles being what they are, we have to have a bear market again. And so my thinking is just like, I don't know. I don't think really any of these projects can survive a true bear market like that. At least not without sort of becoming something completely different. And all of these wild, ambitious, we're going to create a whole metaverse, blah, blah, blah stuff having to go by the wayside because, suddenly ApeCoin is literally worth $0 and your Bored Ape is worth $5,000 and, your Moonbird is worth, $27 or something. Like that to me is the true measure. And it has to happen at some point, I think. Unless the number just keeps going up forever, which has never happened before, but who knows? Maybe it could.
We'll see. Well, I'm glad this is being recorded so we can revisit it.
Yeah.
Whenever it does happen,
yeah,
or in 5 years, maybe. I'm going to
totally.
set a reminder.
Set a reminder
for 5 years.
For 5 years. Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll see how right or how wrong I was. Because it's hard. It's so easy. It's so easy in the future to look back, right, and be like, "Oh, of course that would happen." Like. But we didn't know that NFTs were going to be a thing. If you had told me in 2019 that I'd be sitting here having sold all of my songs as NFTs and made as much money as I did, I would say that is like beyond my wildest dreams of what NFTs could have been. I literally would have been like, you're describing a situation that I couldn't even conceive of it being that amazing. That big. I literally in 2019, that's only 3 years ago, could not have conceived of what it became. I would have been like, you're crazy. Like that doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to send you a calendar invite for 5 years in the future.
Perfect.
And if we're still using Google Calendar in 5 years and we see it, that we're getting together and we're doing something. We're re-listening to this episode.
I'm so down.
Getting some drinks, maybe recording another one over this one where we just replay segments from this one and laugh about all the things that we said.
Oh, it's perfect. I'm so down for that. I love
All
that.
right. Well, Jonathan, I know you've got to go soon, but any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up here?
Yeah, the SongADAO motto, our creed that we're adopting, is comes from Jake the dog, who's one of my favorite characters on Adventure Time, and he says, "Sucking at something is the first step to being kind of good at something."
I love that. What a great note to end on.
That's
Finally, Jonathan, if people want to find you, if they want to check out your songs, join SongADAO, where can they go to do all of those things?
SongADAO.world is the place. You can always bid on today's song. You can find a link to OpenSea there. You can read all about SongADAO. That is the place to go if you want to learn more and join SongADAO.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast
Woohoo!
again. Happy to have you back anytime. Well, now the DAO will have to vote you back in, but I'm sure that
Perfect.
won't
No,
be a problem.
I have a vote, so I'm going to vote for myself.
There you go. You can nominate yourself, vote for yourself, campaign for other people to vote for you.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you everybody for tuning in as always, and we'll be back again soon with another episode of Rehash. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to get involved in helping shape next season of the podcast, including nominating and voting on your favorite guests, go to rehash.mirror.xyz to join our crowdfund. And don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe to help us get this podcast heard by as many people as possible. Thanks for being part of this community, and I can't wait to connect with many of you in Discord and Twitter soon.